Hello, and welcome to FI for Kids, the podcast about guiding your kids on the path to financial independence and extraordinary lives. I'm your host, Dominic Delacqua. Our guest today is Brock Alvord. Brock is a certified financial planner and wealth advisor with Farther Finance. And today we're going to discuss some common investment options parents can use to give their kids an early start on their journey to FI. Welcome, Brock, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Dominic, for having me. Glad to be here.
So let's start with you just telling us a little bit about your background and what got you interested in financial planning.
Yeah, so graduated high school, was starting college, had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something where I helped people. I grew up, my dad was actually a physical therapist, and for a long time I thought I wanted to do that and did an internship in high school and found out pretty quickly that was not for me. Uh, but anyways, yeah, so started in college and got introduced to the person who actually created the financial planning program at the university I was at, and spent a half hour with him, and that conversation with him completely changed my life. He was like, Brock, you could be the reason a couple doesn't get divorced. You could be the reason someone's able to send their child to college for the first time. And just some of those things just really resonated with me, and I just started digging into it and just fell in love with financial planning and just, you know, money's a pretty big stress on people's lives, and I can be a pretty big blessing to try and help alleviate that stress and take their finances to help them live their dream life. And so it's been an amazing journey so far.
Yeah, cool. No, that's great. That's a really interesting way to think about financial planning. I don't know that most people who are on the other side of the financial planning world think about it in that way. So that's cool to hear you explain what really drew you to it. So that's cool. Okay, so we're going to talk about some investment options parents can use. Let's start maybe with something that probably most parents are familiar with, at least even if they don't know the details, they're familiar with it. It's out there. Let's start by talking about 529s. Tell us how those work, what they are, pros and cons, whatever's on your mind about those.
Yeah, and if it's all right, I think it'd be helpful to kind of set the stage for this. There's multiple accounts that parents can consider, but I think it's important to really dial in and realize what the goal is you're trying to accomplish for your kids. And I think that most often those come into it's usually either to help pay for higher education, could be to help them grow their wealth, or create some flexibility for them. So there's different accounts that can accomplish those in different ways, and the most common one is the 529, just like you referenced. So 529, to kind of start that off, the purpose of a 529 is it's a tax advantaged account, specifically for higher education expenses. So it's a great tool to help set your kids up to actually be able to pay for school, and ideally, if possible, avoid graduating with any kind of debt if possible. So
And so tax advantage, so that means it's a pre-tax account. So whatever you're putting in there, then the parents aren't being taxed on. Is that right?
so not quite. So the way this works is you're actually going to it's, and we don't have to get too technical, but you're technically going to put in post-tax dollars, so money that's already been taxed. And the big benefit is the growth in the account is going to be tax-free, and the distributions or the withdrawals are going to be tax-free if used for education expenses. So the big benefit there, right, is if I open this account for my child the day they're born and start putting money into it, well, it's going to grow because I'm able to invest that money in the stock market and in different things. That money's going to grow, and if I make, call it $10,000 to $20,000, I can actually take out that $10,000 to $20,000 tax free, and I don't have to pay any taxes on it if we use it for higher education expenses. So
Okay.
that's the primary benefit. There is the tax benefit.
Okay. Well, and also as you're going, right, that compound interest that if you start it early, by the time then your kids are ready to start college, that money's had time to grow and multiply and sort of make more money just by that compound interest.
Absolutely, yeah. And most people aren't actually aware there's two types of 529 plans. There's either the educational savings account, or there's another version called a prepaid tuition account. More often than not, people are talking about the educational savings account. But the way the prepaid one works is you can actually lock in the tuition rate um, based on the time you open the account and start putting money into it. Versus the educational one, you can put the money in and invest it, and it grows long term, and you get that compound interest. And so, more often than not, it's better to take the compound interest rather than lock in a lower tuition rate rather than paying the higher one later on.
So I want to come back around to the compound interest and how you invest that money, but um, on the tuition, so what did you call that again? The one with the tuition rate?
It's a prepaid tuition
Oh,
account.
prepaid tuition. Okay. So now do you have to know which school you're going to? How does that, just tell us a little bit about how those work.
Yeah, I never actually used one personally. I've always recommended doing the educational savings account. But from my understanding, essentially you're just going to identify what the tuition is. And I assume you identify which school you're going to go to. But you're going to identify what the tuition rate is at that point. And you basically lock that in. And then in the future, when you go to pay, you don't have to pay the higher tuition that has increased with inflation over time. You're able to pay when you locked it in years and years ago. But oftentimes it actually still makes more sense to do the educational savings account route because you're able to get a higher return in the market than you could just the inflation of the tuition increasing.
Right, right. Okay. Interesting. I had never heard about that type of 529. So
Yeah, not often talked about, and usually not used too often.
yeah,
It's usually the first one that's the most common. So
yeah. Okay. So back to the the more common 529. So you put your money in there, and then once you do that, would parents then have the ability to decide which stocks or mutual funds or ETFs they want those funds invested in? Is that right?
yeah, that's correct. And so when you set up your 529, they're all state sponsored plans. So it's based on the state that you open it in, and you don't actually have to open it in the state that your residency is. You can technically open it up into any state sponsored plan, and they all have different pros and cons. But identifying one of the big things is going to be the investment options they provide in that state sponsored plan.
Sure.
But you're correct, right? You're going to be able to put it into usually ETFs or mutual funds to get some stock exposure. They'll usually have some fixed income, some money market, some cash positions, and a lot of the times they'll actually have what they call age based models. Well, where they will invest the money based on the age of the child. So the younger the child is, the more aggressive the account's going to be, and then as they progress towards the age of 18, they'll progressively get more and more conservative until oftentimes there's much more cash because they're expecting the child's going to start using that money to actually go to school.
Right. And so just to clarify, so by aggressive, you mean it's going to be, let's say, a higher percentage of stocks versus bonds as a simple example,
Correct.
because those are
Yep.
more volatile and that's more aggressive. And then as it gets closer, the same way that is often recommended for people as they age and get closer to retirement, right? When you're younger and investing in the stock market, you can have a heavier emphasis on stocks, less on bonds, and then that gradually you sort of reallocate that and rebalance and change those percentages over time. So that's what you mean by
Exactly.
aggressive versus more conservative.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
You said it better than I could have.
Well, I don't know about that, but um, okay. So, and that makes sense, right? So if there's different state-sponsored plans, just like when people, adults that are working and they've got a 401k plan that's administered by their employer, depending on who's administering that plan for them, they'll have access to some types of funds and ETFs and maybe not access to others. So that makes sense that the 529s would work in a similar fashion. So
Yep. No, but
okay.
yep, exactly.
And so, but then picking those stocks or bonds or however you're going to allocate those is either going to require that someone really, if they're going to do this self-directed, that they've really done their research and know what they're doing, which is not uncommon in the FI world. But for people that aren't comfortable with that or that are new to it, then that's where someone like you talking with a certified financial planner could be really beneficial. Then they don't have to do all that work themselves because you've done that research for them and can
Yeah,
have this
absolutely.
conversation about, I'm assuming, what their goals are and how long they're thinking, age of the child, like you said, all that sort of thing.
yeah, and how comfortable they are with the risk. Sometimes we'll meet with people and they still want some growth. And so sometimes those age-based models will be more conservative than they actually want it. So there's some more customization that you can consider.
Sure, sure. That makes sense. Okay. I don't know. Anything else you wanted to cover about 529s?
Yeah, so a couple other thoughts there. So one of the big benefits I like to point out to people with 529s is it encourages the child to use the money for higher education, where some of the other investment accounts you can use, they can take it and use it in different ways. So that's one of the things I really like is it's right. It's going to encourage them to use it in the way that ideally you were wanting them to. So that's a big benefit of using the 529. In addition to that, Congress just came out with some new rules with the 529 that you can actually say one of your kids don't end up using their 529 for college or they don't use all of it. You can actually roll up to 35,000 per child into a Roth IRA afterwards. So if they don't end up using it all, you can actually still take that and transfer it over, and then that's going to build up wealth and it turns into a retirement account for them, which is really amazing and a great change that I love. Um, Another thing is there's no age limit for using a 529. Some of the other accounts we might talk through, there's actually age limits that you have to use the money by. But say you have a child in their 40s that decides they want to go back to school, they could still use a 529 to go back to school and use it. So a couple of extra things there to consider.
Well, that rollover bit into a Roth IRA is important, right? So, because that happens sometimes, right? Kids, you plan for them to go and they get to a point and that's just not their thing, or maybe they try it for a while and decide that's not my thing, and they decide to pursue a career in or a work in whatever it is, it doesn't involve college. So that's nice they have that option to roll it over. That makes me think though, sometimes kids will go to college for a little while and then they take an extended time off. They may ultimately end up going back. So if we have a kid that does that, are they able to just leave that money in that 529 and then, but they're out of school for 2 years, they go travel the world or whatever they do, and then they decide to go back to school, then that they can still leave that there and still use that for education. Is that correct?
Yeah, yep, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess if we go back to the same example, if they decided they thought they were going to go back to school, left it in their 529, ultimately decided, you know what, I'm not doing that, then they could roll that over to the Roth IRA.
Correct. Yeah. And it's up to the parent. Another option they could consider, right? Let's say one of their kids ends up going to Harvard, that's much more expensive, and the other child decides not to. You can actually change who the beneficiary is on the accounts at any point. So you can actually adjust and if you didn't want to have them roll it into a Roth IRA, you could change it to another child's name or a grandchild or so there's a lot of flexibility with that rule that comes into place where you can still use it for higher education for different people, or if you don't, then you can transfer it into that Roth IRA for them for a retirement account.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Great. So lots of flexibility there. I didn't know that either. So that's good to know.
Yep.
Okay. What do you want to talk about next?
So the next account that I think is helpful to compare to 529s is the Coverdell Education Savings Account, or ESA
Hmm.
is often what it's referred to. It's definitely not as popular as a 529, but it's another option I think should be considered. And it functions fairly similarly to a 529. You're going to get the same tax-free growth and withdrawals for educational expenses. Some of the additional benefits it's going to provide is you can have a greater array of investment options than you can through a traditional 529 account. There's also a broader range of what qualifies as a higher education expense. The downside of this one is there's an annual limit on how much you can put into the account, which is $2,000 a year currently. And then there's also an income limit. So if you, as the parent or the donor, makes over a certain amount, they will actually make it so that you can't put money into the account if you make too much money.
Okay.
So, but for people that are lower income earners that qualify, it can actually be oftentimes a better option than a 529 because of some of the more flexibility you have in the investments, and then also what qualifies as expenses. Um, and then Another downside to point out really quick on this one is so you can only make contributions up till age 18. And then this one, the funds actually have to be used by their age 30, the beneficiary's age 30. So just something to consider there as well.
Okay. That still gives them, that's a pretty generous, that's a 12-year window. So,
Yep.
but I can see how that something like that might make sense just off the top of my head. If you've got a lower income family who maybe, they're not even sure if they're going to be able to send their kids to college, or maybe no one in that family has gone to college before, and they're happy to get someone to go to college at all. And they may do a community college, which is going to cost less, but they still don't maybe have the money. They're not sure they're going to have the money to pay for it at the time. So if they start, even though the annual limits are small, that can still be significant for a less expensive college experience. So, and still moves those kids forward. Would that apply to something like if they wanted to do a trade school or something?
Yep. Yeah, that does apply to trade school. And a 529 does as well. They
Okay.
recently changed the rules on 529s. And then you can also use both of them also for private K through 12 tuition as well. They're going to a private school.
Oh,
So you can
okay.
even use it
Interesting.
before higher education in some places.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. And what was that called again? Give us that one more time.
It's a Coverdell Education Savings account.
Okay.
So, and more often than not, a 529 is probably going to make more sense for most people, but there are some different unique benefits to a Coverdell ESA that may make sense for some people.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Um, where do you want to go next?
We could tackle custodial Roth IRA.
Yeah, I've got some questions actually then about IRAs as we go along with that. So sure, let's do it.
Perfect. Okay. So a Roth IRA, custodial Roth IRA is going to allow you with the phrasing I used at the beginning, right? If we're trying to target either educational expenses or building wealth or flexibility, this one's going to be the best to help build wealth long term for children. There's some different caveats you have to pay attention with a custodial Roth IRA, but essentially how it works is just like any other normal Roth IRA. You're going to put money in, post-tax dollars in, and then the benefit there is it's going to grow tax-free, and distributions are tax-free if you follow the rules in place with a Roth IRA. And those are generally that you have to leave the money in until age 59 and a half, and then you can start pulling it out. But that's a great way if you can start putting some money away for your kids while they're young and give them 40, 50 years of compound interest. It's a really great tool to build long-term wealth for your kids,
Sure.
specifically geared towards helping them prepare for retirement.
Okay. And so that's custodial, so the parents administer that. They could, I guess, if they
Correct.
wanted to, have conversations with their kids when they feel like they're old enough, and they could look at that together and pick investments together if they wanted to go that route. But they
Absolutely.
but they wouldn't have to if the parents just wanted to administer it.
Correct. Yeah. And at some point, based on the state you live in, there's a transfer of control. So at some point when the child reaches adulthood, which is typically around age 18 or 21, depending on the state you live in, you do have to transfer that account to the child. So then they own it. They can technically do whatever they want with it. And so it's important to have those conversations while they're young and prepare them and have them know that they have this account and how it works and what they can do. Because they could technically, as soon as they turn 18, take all that money out. There's going to be some penalties and they'll actually have to pay taxes on it. And they could go take it and buy a new car if they
Yeah.
wanted, which isn't necessarily what the parents probably intended that money for.
Yeah,
So,
sure. Yeah. Well, hopefully, if they're putting this money aside for them, they're also teaching them and having conversations about money and planning and stuff. But that's
exactly.
that's a different conversation. And maybe we'll touch on that a little bit at the end. So, okay. So, oh, I had a question about the Roth IRAs. Oh, so since it's an IRA, it still has the money that goes in there still has to come from income. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep. So the child has to have some kind of earned income. Could be through babysitting, mowing lawns, washing garbage cans, or having an actual job. But yeah, you're correct. They do have the child specifically has to have earned income. Doesn't necessarily mean the parent has to, that the child's income has to be the money that's put into the Roth IRA. The parent could still take their money and make that contribution on behalf of the child, but the child has to have earned income in order to do this.
Okay. And so if it's a kid who's doing, washing garbage cans around the neighborhood or mowing lawns, babysitting, that's not really typically verifiable in terms of having a job where you've got a paycheck and all that sort of thing. And that's still okay. You just have to, as you do, have to make some sort of attestation that your kid has an income, is earning some income or
Yeah, usually the best practice for this is to file a tax return for the child.
okay.
That way there's some proof of here's what their income was, here's the money that they made. Obviously, you're gonna have to pay some taxes on that. But for the child, they're usually in a low tax bracket. They're usually not making very much.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really good way to prove it. And another thing to add on there is these Roth IRAs, those still have an annual contribution limit, just like for any traditional Roth IRA or IRA, there's a contribution limit. Typically, that's 7,000 per year. Um, but for a custodial Roth IRA, well, either way, it's really up to either that 7,000 or the total earned income of the person. So if the child only made $1,000, they can really only put up to $1,000 into the account, even though the contribution limit is technically 7,000.
Yeah, right. Okay. No, that's good. That's an important detail to know. Now, are kids able to do their own IRA? So let's say someone like our daughter has her first job. She's working at a restaurant, making a little bit of money, works, few shifts a week. Is she able to start her own IRA? Her employer doesn't have a 401k, but let's say that they did have a 401k plan. Are kids that aren't yet 18 able to contribute directly into things like that?
Yeah, she can. Yeah, she could go open up a Roth IRA under her name, and then because she has that earned income, right, which is the contingency, she can actually make contributions on her own behalf into a Roth IRA.
Into a Roth. And if her employer has it available, they could even do pre-tax with a 401k or a traditional IRA. Is that correct? And just have it withdrawn out of their paychecks if their employer offers that?
Yeah, yep. They could actually do both if they made enough, and
Oh,
they
sure.
could contribute to both of them. Yeah,
Yeah, okay. So another good thing to know, just depending on the listeners and their kids' circumstances. And again, it's a great way to start to have those conversations with your kids. And and you can be putting money into some investment vehicles for them, but also when they get to be 15, 16 and start working, start teaching them about allocating part of their own money and just help create that habit that hopefully they're going to want to carry over when they get older, which is making sure they're setting a percentage of their income aside to save and then invest.
correct. No, and for parents that will actually take the time and sit down with their children and teach that habit. It's amazing what you can do, and especially the earlier you start, and if you actually can start these investment accounts earlier, the impact of that compound interest over a 50, 60 year period it's pretty astronomical.
So I'm going to add this real briefly. I won't go on about this too long. So, but for any listeners out there that are interested in sort of seeing what that compound interest might look like, if you sign up for our newsletter at fiforkids.com, we have a simple spreadsheet tool that you can use with your kids for them to track their money, and it's set up for younger teens. And then also for older teens, because then they start to have more expenses. But there's also on there a tab where it's just a very simple compound interest projector. So it's a really simple way. You enter in a few simple details, and then you can show your kids, give them a visual of, okay, this is what this money will do for you in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, just to help give them an idea of what compound interest means. And you can change the interest rate and play around with some of the details, play around with how much they're putting in at as they get a little bit older to help give them an understanding of how powerful that can be. So if anybody's interested in that, sign up for our newsletter and we'll send that out to you for free.
That sounds like an amazing tool, and the earlier they can learn it, the more incentivized they're going to be to keep saving. And again, the sooner you get started, the more powerful compound interest is.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of like really great tools out there that are more detailed, but for kids, we just wanted something that was like they just need a quick idea because it's hard to get your head around,
It is. Yep.
right? When especially as a kid, you're like, I don't know, whatever. Like, all that stuff is so far out, like you don't care. But this was so that's why we made it just really simple to give them like enough of an idea to grab onto that then, right, you can continue to have conversations with them as they get older.
You know,
Um,
funny enough that you mentioned that. Actually, when my wife and I were in college, I was trying to teach her what compound interest was and show her we need to be investing more money. And she, no, 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 we don't need to. And it finally took she took a family finance class and they taught her compound interest. And for whatever reason, whatever that professor taught was different than what I was telling her, and it finally clicked for her. And I remember she came home one day and she's like, "Why didn't I listen to you? Like we need to be putting more money away." So it's when people grasp it, it's an amazing tool, time is such a big factor in that. So the sooner you can get them on board and realize that, the more impactful that is.
yeah, yeah. Um, okay. So IRAs, 529s. We want to talk about UTMAs at all, UTMAs?
Yeah, we can. So UTMAs, UTMAs, going back to those three primary purposes, this is going to be probably the best one for flexibility. It doesn't have as good of tax benefits, but it's going to allow you to use the money not necessarily just for retirement or educational expenses, but for a broader array of things for your kids. So I think that's the biggest benefit there. The way this works from a technical standpoint is the investment earnings are going to be taxed at the child's tax rate. There's a benefit there, right? That's usually lower than the parent's tax rate. Um, so that's going to come into play. You're going to have to pay the taxes on that for the child. And then on top of that, in my personal opinion, sometimes that flexibility can actually be a downside because the child, once they reach that legal age of adulthood, again, it's based on the state you live in, usually around 18 or 21, they're going to receive that account, and now they own that money in the account outright, and they can take that and go use it however they want. But again, ideally, these parents are sitting down with their kids and teaching them, helping them understand um, that we don't want to go waste this money and just take it out and go blow it on something that's not important and isn't going to build financial independence.
Yeah, right. So, and tell us what UTMA stands for.
It's Unified Trust. I can't even think of what the N stands for.
Minor, I think, isn't it?
Uniform Transfers to Minor Act is what it is.
Okay. And so, and this is a good question actually, because I know with UTMAs or UTMAs, so if you've got a family and you've got aunts and uncles or grandparents who want to contribute to your kids, they can actually put money into those UTMA accounts, right? They can, is that also true with any of the other accounts? What are people's
Yeah,
options just in terms of extended family who want to contribute to kids' financial future, putting money into those?
yeah. So 529, you're really going to be able to do essentially the same thing. You can name just about anyone as the beneficiary on those 529s, but you're correct. Between those two, those are really the ones that you can do that for extended family.
Okay. But that doesn't apply for the Roth IRAs.
I do not believe so,
Okay.
but I have not seen it. So
Okay. So we're not entirely sure about that one. So people could either look into that or give you a
yeah,
call, maybe send you an email
sure.
or reach out to a local financial planner if they have one and
Yep,
ask that question if that's something they might be interested in.
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Um, I know you mentioned something when we talked a couple weeks ago about some tax advantages for parents that are paying their kids. Let's talk about that because that was something completely new to me. And I know some parents that I've talked to for the podcast are doing things like that. So they might be really interested to know what their options are there. So explain that to us.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a big contingency, and it's that you actually have to be a business owner.
Okay.
So this has to be structured under a business. But one of my favorite strategies, and there's a really big tax strategy, you're going to want to work with your CPA. There's some big rules around this. but you can actually hire your kids to do work in the business for you. So it could be cleaning the office, it could be picking up the mail, mowing the lawn outside. There's a lot of different things you can do. They just have to legitimately be doing work for the business, but then the business can actually pay these your kids, and it's going to give a big tax deduction to the business owner and help them on their taxes. And then the great thing is then your kids have earned income. So you can take that money and go put it into a Roth IRA for them. And then there's really a double benefit because you're tackling one, you're going to get the tax benefit as the business owner. And then two, you're able to put that money and save it for the child's future into a Roth IRA. Um, so that's a really great strategy. But yeah, so if you're a business owner, that's a really great strategy to consider, is finding a way that your child can legally work through the business. And generally you can have them start, around age 7. I've seen people do this with infants where they pay them to model for their business and they use them in their advertisements, right? You just have to do it in a legal way and in a way that actually makes sense, and your tax professional can help you with that. But if you're actually a business owner, it's a great strategy that you can use to help you on your taxes, and then create that financial independence for your kid down the road.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's great. That's really good because there's a lot of people out there that have, whether that's their main means of support or if it's just some sort of a side business, but that's still something they could potentially take advantage of.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. It doesn't have to be your full-time job if it's just a side gig and it's still under a business. Absolutely, that's definitely an option. And you're going to teach your kids to work as well. They're going to,
Yeah.
learn to work. They're going to still get some kind of a paycheck. So there's some really great things that you can use there.
Okay. Any other investment options that you think people might want to be aware of?
I think those are the main four that most people focus on. Obviously, there's going to be some others, traditional bank accounts, CDs, different things like that that you can look at and consider. But those are the main accounts that I can think of that most people consider when looking at creating investments for their kids.
Okay. So we've talked on this about this a little bit, the importance of financial education for your kids. I don't know, let's take 2 minutes and just kind of give us your final thoughts about why that's so important. Any thoughts you have about just as a society in general, how we could do better at teaching our kids about finance, or maybe your experience is we do a good job. I tend to think we teach kids all sorts of things, but not we don't do such a good job as parents teaching them about money oftentimes. So I don't know, guess give us your final thoughts on this bigger topic sort of stuff.
Absolutely. I think we could, as a society, do a much better job teaching our youth, our children, financial independence and just finances in general. Unfortunately, and I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's like somewhere around 60% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency if they have one.
Yeah.
And that's so saddening to me. And that really ultimately it really comes down to, were they educated? Most people weren't. They were never taught how to budget. They weren't taught, how to save money and set money aside. They weren't taught to have an emergency fund. They weren't taught to start saving for their goals and their future. And oftentimes that comes back to bite them. And so absolutely, I think a lot of times parents might rely on the school system, and unfortunately for most, it's just not at a place where it can teach them. And a lot of people I think are just learning through experience at some point. But for parents that are proactive and take the time to really sit down and have conversations with their kids and talk through these different things and help give them structure and process as they're young to, you know, have some kind of paycheck that they're getting from their parents for things they're doing around the house, and teach them to save and to set money aside and to budget. And the sooner you can do that, I think the better off your kids are going to be as they grow older and reach adulthood, because they'll have done that for years and years and years.
Well, then it becomes a habit. That's what we talk about a lot at our house, and just really is an emphasis, I think, within the FI community in general. But right, just creating those good habits around money, and so the earlier you can start having those conversations with your kids, and they can be at a pretty simple level. When your kids are 7, you don't. It doesn't have to be highfalutin, complicated conversation,
Yeah,
but you're just helping, you give them a little bit of an allowance and they have to save a certain amount or however you want to approach it. But it just starts teaching that habit that then that becomes sort of part of what they expect and just how they interact with money. And hopefully, when then they become adults, that carries over because you mentioned, right, a lot of people just learn by experience. A lot of that experience, this was certainly true in my case, is painful experience, right? Um,
absolutely.
that then you have to dig your way out of after the fact. And if you can avoid that for your kids by creating those habits and skills in them when they're younger, I think you've just given them a huge advantage going forward.
Absolutely. And once they figure the simple and the basics out, then, once they reach adulthood, there's a whole lot more that you can start doing to really build long-term wealth and that financial independence. And the sooner you can get them started, the sooner they get there, and the better off your kids are going to be.
Yeah, yeah, couldn't agree more, Brock. Couldn't agree more. So, Brock, if people want to reach out and they've got questions, how can they get a hold of you?
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn, just through my name, Brock Alvord. It's a pretty unique name, so fortunately, I should be the only one on there. The other way is you can email me directly. I'm happy to answer questions, jump on calls, and talk through things. But you can reach me at Brock, BROCK, Alvord, ALVORD, at farther.com.
Great, thank you. I'll put that information in the show notes too, and also on our website, fiforkids.com. You can find him there. So thank you so much, Brock, for coming on. I think great information, lots of good details for people. So really appreciate you making time for us.
No, I appreciate it. And I love what you're doing. This is a great topic, and I think it can have a huge impact on the lives of future generations.
Well,
So,
great. Well, we're trying. So thanks. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of the FI for Kids podcast. Please subscribe and follow the show. That helps get the word out to other parents and kids that are interested in pursuing their journey towards financial independence. And it also helps us continue to attract interesting guests. You can find contact info for our guests as well as links for books and other resources in the show notes and at our website, fiforkids.com. Our intro music is provided courtesy of Douglas Cameron. You can find Doug's music at douglascameron.net, Spotify, Pandora, and Amazon Music. Our exit music is provided courtesy of the Zoo Human Project. You can find their music on Spotify and Pandora. You can also find them on Facebook. Thanks again, and we'll talk next week.
Life was once the standard of the day. Now most rot in the material plane. With art on the back burner and makeup in the microwave. How can a world full of flavor be so painfully bland? What should we do? Redefine value. Satiate the end of you. Oh, yeah. Let the music move you. It's better late. It's better late than never. It's better late. It's better late to purify this polluted stream. Leave our suits on the bankside, let our souls get swept away. We'll empty out into the ocean and rise up under the rays of the sun. satiate the inner you. Oh, yeah, let the music move.